Well, let's start with Lewis first, because he did get the pole for the Turkish Grand Prix, even though he has that 10-place grid penalty, that annoying 10-place grid penalty for a component change in his power unit. So he'll be starting P11 tomorrow on the clean side of the grid as well. So he needed to be on the pole so that he didn't start 12th on the dirty side, and of course with another car, yet another car to pass. So very good job by Lewis and by Mercedes. The most difficult moment, unquestionably, in qualifying in Turkey was Q1, because as the cars lined up in the pit lane to begin qualifying, it wasn't raining, but there were a few spots of rain falling. Within 3 to 4 minutes, it was raining relatively hard in various parts of the circuit. So the big question then, with everybody on the dry weather red Pirelli tyre, the softest tyre of the three, was how to pace your qualifying, whether to do 2 runs, whether to stay out. There was going to be traffic, people were going off. Carlos Sainz went off twice, for example, although it didn't really matter for him because he started from the back of the grid anyway. And I thought Mercedes did a really good job there. This is one of these moments when it wasn't the race, there weren't any spotlights there on the strategy, bring Lewis in, bring Valtteri in or not. This was hidden behind all the chaos of Q1, if you like, but Mercedes making a great call to leave both drivers out there, and both Valtteri and Lewis by the end had 10, 11 laps on those slick Pirellis, but it was enough for Lewis not only to find the grip as the track got a little bit drier towards the end of Q1, but also, of course, to find a lap relatively free of traffic. And that made him P1. And that has to be seen in the context, P1 and Q1, that has to be seen in the context of at one stage, with about 5 minutes to go, Lewis was P10. So there was a chance, you know, there's always a risk, obviously, that he wasn't going to make it through. Anything could have happened, particularly if Mercedes had taken the option, as everybody else did, to do a second run on a new set of red Pirellis. And that, of course, meant getting temperature into the tyres as well. So great call by Merck, a great job by Lewis. Q2 happened pretty well. And Q3, he went out and put his pole lap in before everybody else had kind of woken up for the second run. Normally, everybody tries to leave it till the end, but Lewis went out, absolutely clear track, and got the pole, breezed the pole. Really, really good job. So he will be starting P11, and he hadn't lost anything from yesterday. Still very quick in a straight line, 321, 322 kilometers an hour. And we'll be thinking, get through the first corner, obviously, because that first downhill left-hander in Turkey, always a trap off the line. And having Lewis start P11 is, I think we should be allowed to think of 2006, when Lewis was in the GP2 race, and he started somewhere midfield in the Sunday race, and he was just brilliant, passing people everywhere. He didn't actually win it. I think from memory, I think it was Andreas Zuber, whatever happened to him, who won the race, but he was so good, Lewis. And that was the first, you know, if there was a moment when Lewis Hamilton arrived, I think in the minds of the Formula One people in the pit lane, it was probably then. Silverstone too, maybe, but I mean, this was an iconic race for Lewis here at Turkey. Circuit hasn't changed very much. He loves the place. And, you know, assuming he gets through that first corner, potentially we're going to see another of those Lewis Hamilton races. Not as easy to pass in a Formula One car 2021 spec, of course, but nonetheless, Lewis has got not much to lose and a lot to gain. So I think you'll see a pretty aggressive Lewis Hamilton tomorrow. Valtteri Bottas, therefore, starts on the pole, and he looked like a driver going into qualifying who knew that, you know, providing he just kept his nose clean, he would be on the pole, and that's what happened. And I didn't really mention him yesterday because in my mind, I'm always assuming, yeah, if it came down to a straight race, straight fight between Valtteri and Max is going to win it. But I suppose I need to revise that and think, yeah, Valtteri's actually probably due for a good result, A, just by the law of averages, B, the Mercedes looks like it is the better car around Turkey, within 2 or 3 tenths, and that adds up, of course, over the race distance. So assuming Valtteri makes a clean start, actually, it is going to be really difficult for Max to beat him tomorrow. There's, you know, it could be the weather. Weather might come into play. It could be some other variables. But bottom line at the moment, Valtteri needs a win as well, doesn't he, to sort of keep his career going and to take that forward into Alfa Romeo next year. So Valtteri, I say a win. I mean, obviously, if Lewis is behind towards the end, I'm pretty sure Mercedes will want him to cede the position to Lewis. It'll be interesting to see what happens if that. You know, it's unlikely Lewis will be that that close to him, I guess. But nonetheless, we'll see what happens tomorrow on that one. So Max Verstappen, P3, he will be disappointed with that, because disappointed in the context of the build-up to this race, knowing that Lewis had that penalty. Max would be thinking, yeah, I should be winning this one. But right now, what we said yesterday is the case. The Mercedes, with the new Pirelli rears and the updates that both Mercedes and Red Bull have made over the last couple of months, the Mercedes is now a much better car than it was, more competitive car than it was at the start of the year. And that's what Max Verstappen is racing against now. And he doesn't have the best car tomorrow. He has a pretty good car. Red Bull did a very good job overnight in going back to getting a decent top speed within 1 or 2 kilometers an hour of Mercedes, and then finding more grip and giving him a more drivable race car. So Max, in that sense, will be feeling, we're kind of back in the ballpark, but he won't be feeling this is a race to go out and that I'm just going to win tomorrow. It's going to be a hard job for him tomorrow. So that's a good recovery from Red Bull, almost there, but not really where they were at the start of the year relative to Mercedes, but not a bad job overall. Interesting to see some comparisons between Lewis and Max breaking into turn 9 yesterday and today. And on both days, different conditions, different everything. Lewis Hamilton braking 9 meters later than Max Verstappen into turn 9. So that's the downhill chicane, third, fourth gear chicane, after they've come out of the long left-hander, braking downhill. Lewis braking 9 meters later than Max, consistently into there, which kind of bears out everything I've been saying about Max. You can see in other videos why I think he is so quick, even though he brakes so early. And I wonder, I'm just hoping that, with all these graphics being thrown at him all the time, that Max isn't going to think, I've got to start braking later, because it will throw him off kilter if he does that, for sure. The way he's driving, he's absolutely beautiful to watch, and his ability to get into a corner with a stable platform is just, well, it's right up there with Lewis's class. It's just that Lewis is a slightly different driver, slightly earlier turn in on the brakes as well from Lewis's point of view. But I don't think you can say one is better than the other. I just think, there's Max, his classic trademark, brake early. And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we saw George Russell almost get into Q3 in the Williams. And of course, George is incredibly quick. We know that. We know how fast George is. But it's important to look at him now, because he is going to be Lewis Hamilton's teammate next year, and he is going to give Lewis a much harder time than Valtteri Bottas has over the last 2 years. So it's a really important thing from a Lewis Hamilton World Championship Mercedes point of view, and how much it's going to cramp Lewis's style. But it was interesting, I thought, that on that last corner, on a really good lap in Q2, that George basically just put too much power on too aggressively in the middle of the corner, lost the back end, ran wide, and didn't get through to Q3. What we saw George doing there was a result of not having the stable platform that Max generates just before the rotation point. George is doing it based on his innate feel and self-confidence that if he gives it a little bit earlier steering or a little bit more throttle, he's got the ability just to hold the slide and catch it. And that's fine 99.9% of the time, except when you're under massive pressure and the checkered flag's already gone out and you're on your last lap to try to get into Q3. That's when everything that I'm talking about comes into play. And that's what we saw there. That was a George Russell characteristic that you don't often see Lewis do. You see Lewis doing what Charles does, and occasionally Max, braking too late on a Friday or a Saturday morning, locking up, going wide. But very rarely do you see Lewis on a dry track lose at mid-corner like that, or Charles for that matter. Having said that, Charles did do that at the last corner, and he did it in a way that suggested that the tyres weren't fully hot at the moment, but we'll get on to him in a minute. It's been a fairly messy day for Charles Leclerc, but nonetheless, he did recover in the end. So anyway, just going back to that whole thing, Max Verstappen not being induced into braking any later over the 24 hours, still sticks religiously to his 9 meters earlier than Lewis Hamilton's turn. And I thought that was brilliant. Just on a couple of other of those, other comparisons that came up, we had Pierre Gasly versus Sergio Perez into turn 7. Turn 7 is also heavy braking area, downhill, right-hander before the long left-handers. 9 is after the long left-hander, 7 obviously before it. And in that one, Gasly braking later than Sergio Perez. No real surprise there. Pierre's always been a really, really late braker, but he does get away with it with a certain finesse, and he does have an ability to get the car moving in while he's braking hard. He's really good in the way he comes out of the brake pedal. And that we saw, to me, we saw it the first time at Suzuka in the wet in his Japanese Super Formula era. And he's just the same driver now, really, really good. So no real surprise there to see that Gasly brakes later than Sergio Perez. Then we had another Perez against Max going into turn 9. Yeah, Sergio Perez brakes much later than Max Verstappen into turn 9. Then an interesting one came up. Charles Leclerc versus Lando Norris into turn 9. Who do you reckon was the later braker of those two? Interesting. Lando Norris later than Charles Leclerc. And Leclerc has this aura, I think, probably of being, pretty brave, late breaker, great car control. No, he's all finesse and he's all touch. Not that Lando isn't, but Lando is also a sort of, I think that's where the simulator karting side of Lando comes into play, where it doesn't come into play with a Lewis or a Max or a Charles, where late braking, super late braking, isn't a major factor. So I thought that was interesting. Lando Norris, a later braker than Charles Leclerc into turn 9. Sebastian Vettel against Lance Stroll in the Aston Martins into turn 7. Lance Stroll braking later than Sebastian. No real surprise there. Lots of applause from the pit wall, from the Aston Martin garage when Lance got through into Q3. And I was thinking, with the way the Pirelli sidewalls have helped Mercedes, they for sure are helping Aston Martin as well. And it's, given where they were last year, given where they were in the Force India days, I thought it was kind of disappointing and a little bit weird to have them cheering this guy just because he got into Q3. I mean, that's a pretty good car. And, the risk of upsetting a few people and coming out with a question that obviously is rhetorical. But, if Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen were driving for Aston Martin and had been from the start of the year, I think they would be a little bit further up the grid. So anyway, Lance Stroll brakes later than Sebastian Vettel. He's probably quite upset to know that, because Lance probably likes to think that he's a relatively early braker that has a sort of max stable-like platform. That's the way he tries to drive. But anyway, to brake later than Vettel, that's really late, I would have thought. And then the other point is, I've had a few comments about why we don't talk about when they get on the power, who's on full power first. Well, the reason I don't go into that, and I don't think it's significant, is because that graphic doesn't tell you how much G-load they're carrying at the moment they're on full power. Because if you're on 2/3 throttle with the car almost straight, but not quite, doing a Kimi Räikkönen, just getting absolutely perfect on the loaded left rear, Kimi Räikkönen McLaren spec, then obviously that's better than being on full throttle with the back end out. So I disregard completely all the data relating to when they're on full throttle. And even that, how late you brake is related to what you're doing with the car at that moment, whether you're extending the straight, whether you're continuing to brake in a straight line, making the corner longer going in. So it's really a bit of fun more than anything else. I don't think anybody should get too carried away with analysis of that particular data as it comes up. So let's just go through the grid quickly then. So it's Lewis Hamilton 22.8, but he'll be starting P11. Valtteri Bottas on the pole, 22.9. Max's best, 23.1. Bear in mind that yesterday Max was doing 24.4. You see how much Red Bull have managed to improve the car. I'm sure some of that is, just running qualifying, whatever, power set up on the car. And Lewis, 23.8 yesterday, 22.8 today. So they find a second when they really screwed the car up for qualifying. So Max 23.1, but a really good lap at the end by Charles Leclerc 23.2. He was right on the edge in Q2. The Ferrari, when it was wet and slippery and they had to get temperature into the tyres very quickly, the Ferrari was completely out of it because it doesn't have that much inherent downforce. We know that. We've been saying that from the start of the year. What it has, like Mercedes, is a more stable car when they have reasonable downforce, and it's dry and they can get temperature into the tyres, and they're being helped by that more rigid Pirelli sidewall. And so eventually, towards the end of Q3, the track did start to come to Ferrari, and Charles Leclerc just put in this beautiful lap, 23.2, right at the end. Think about Valtteri Bottas doing 22.9 around Turkey in a really, really good Mercedes, albeit, as I said yesterday, Sector 3 is so important, albeit he didn't really get the best from Sector 3 because he'd overused the tyres in Sectors 1 and 2. Charles Leclerc 23.2, that was just a phenomenal lap, I thought. And he was right on the edge. As I say, in Q2, he was P12 as the checkered flag came out. He was obviously on his flying lap, and he just scraped through into Q3. So really good job again by Charles Leclerc, but a sweaty qualifying for him and for Ferrari. Pierre Gasly 23.3, yeah, he was just quick all day. He was really good this morning in the wet, and he was really quick. He was actually quickest in Sector 1 in qualifying. He's just looked good in the Alfa Tauri-Honda, which has been a really good car all weekend. And Yuki Tsunoda made it through into Q3 as well, and managed not to scream at anybody on the radio today. And I'm amazed by that. Maybe he is starting to watch the videos. And then Fernando Alonso, who I think in many ways could be the story of qualifying, 23.4 in the Alpine, just behind Pierre Gasly. Esteban Ocon didn't even make it through to Q3. Esteban Ocon, winner of the Hungarian Grand Prix, didn't even make it through to Q3. And there's Fernando, just stunning. I think Fernando and Charles were just outstanding in Q3 today. Well, Lewis's lap, yeah, of course. Sergio Perez, yeah, 23.7, 0.3 slower than Fernando Alonso in a Red Bull Honda. What does that tell you? Lando Norris, 23.9. Yeah, difficult day for McLaren. Would you believe Daniel Ricciardo didn't even make it out of Q1, and Lando did just by dint of really good, solid, keep the head down driving, no mistakes, and eventually made it through to Q3. But the car isn't they haven't found a sweet spot in that car quite clearly. It's probably related to tyre temperatures. But nonetheless, made it through to Q3. So good job by Lando, and for sure he'll be there tomorrow. Lance Stroll 24.3, so 0.4 slower than Lando on a day when McLaren are not great. So that kind of tells you where Aston Martin are. Yuki Tsunoda. The other point I should just make is that Mick Schumacher made it through to Q2 in the Haas Ferrari. Really good job by Mick. I mean, he just blew Nikita Mazepin away, even though Nikita had actually been quite quick in the wet this morning. So really good job. Good to see that, I thought, for Mick Schumacher. And both Alfa Romeos, where were they? Didn't make it through to Q2 either. So there we are, Lewis with that penalty. I think the only other comment to make about the penalty is that it's actually not a completely stupid thing, isn't it? I mean, if it's the back of the grid one, it's nonsense, because you do what Carlos Sainz did, you spin a couple of times, then you just sit in the garage and you start from the back of the grid and hope for the best. But when you're Lewis Hamilton, you've got a 10-place grid penalty. It behoves you to be as quick as you can possibly be, in the hope that you will start P11 on the clean side of the road, and obviously minimising the damage. And that's what we saw on Lewis today. We don't often see Lewis in that situation with that type of pressure. He's always under pressure, obviously. But that type of pressure is slightly different, because he has to manage a qualifying session to make sure he has no incidents at all and stays out of trouble. And at the same time, he has to try to get the pole, quite obviously. And it was a difficult session because the track conditions changed. It wasn't that hot. Temperatures were difficult to find. And yet he did it all. It was quite impressive, actually. I mean, if you wanted a little cameo of why Lewis Hamilton is so good still, and why it might be a bit depressing at the moment for Max Verstappen, we saw it today with Lewis. I mean, that was just an outstanding job, all told. Obviously, other people in the pit wall made great calls around Lewis, but a lot of that was driven by Lewis, feel for the car. And there was a moment when he said, I'm going to do one more banker lap. As it happened, that banker lap that he did wouldn't have got him through into Q2 because the track got a lot quicker. But it was good thinking, because at the time, people were sitting in the pit lane and there was Lewis doing a lap time that put in P1 or P2 or whatever it was. And then he just stayed out and he got the best from those tyres. Valtteri did too, but by the end, for sure, he couldn't find the same grip that Lewis did. So yeah, really good qualifying by Lewis. Good to see Red Bull have got their performance back. It's not yet right there where Mercedes are. Valtteri Bottas, the pressure's on him to make a clean start from the pole and win the Grand Prix. No reason why he shouldn't do that, really, in theory, with Max right behind him, but it won't be that easy, that is for sure. And Charles Leclerc really, juggling the balls in qualifying, but in the last few minutes of Q3, really got it together for Ferrari, as a class driver always will. Anyway, see you tomorrow.